I call it premature disclosure. And that's the disclosure scenario that could happen this year. I don't think it'll happen this year, but the thing about disclosure, at least my own opinion, is that it comes like a thief in the night. You can't predict it. When I co-authored AD After Disclosure with Bryce Zabel, we really tried thinking this one out as best we could. We tried to be like a think tank, and our opinion was that disclosure would be a sudden thing. You know, there might be a rumor here and there for a couple of days, and then suddenly, our opinion is that it would just transform the world very suddenly. And I'm still with that opinion, even though it's 5 years later. In this scenario, so let's say that the US gambit to take down Russian power fails. Let's say that Russia and China continue their own economic development so that they have their own gold-based currency. Putin's buying up a lot of the world's gold, by the way, with an artificially high dollar, and then he's selling, he's unloading his dollars for gold. So let's just say that what Saddam tried in 2000, which failed, and what Gaddafi tried in the late 2000s, which failed, succeeds with Putin and or China. Let's just say it does. So if it does, you have the end of the dollar's dominance as the global reserve currency. Dollars come back to the United States, cause hyperinflation, bad times, fighting in the streets, like we're seeing in much other parts of the world. We'll see it here more and more as America's global hegemonic domination suddenly ends overnight, with the proviso that the United States would still retain the world's most terrifying military-industrial complex, not a good combination, in my opinion. Think about it. So what would that mean? Well, one thing it could mean is that some crazy American neoconservative policymakers might think, let's start another war, and we could have a real conflagration on our hands. Badly. But it could also mean premature disclosure. So one of the ideas that I've kicked around for years is that, at least my observation, is that at times around the world when there's significant regime change, there are moments where important UFO information leaks out. And the examples that I've often thought of would be the death of Francisco Franco in Spain in 1975. That resulted in the release of quite a few, hundreds of Spanish military UFO reports after his death. When Mao Zedong died in China in 1976, a significant period of openness on many fronts, but including UFOs, occurred in China in the aftermath of that. In the aftermath of America's great political crisis of Watergate, we had an opening up in the Freedom of Information Act, which resulted in a significant number of UFO documents coming out through Freedom of Information. So much so that I think it constituted a real crisis by the late 70s, early 80s, a crisis that was dealt with by US counterintelligence in the form of disinformation. That's another story. But it happened. When the Soviet Union went through its final crisis and collapse in the late 80s and early 90s, we saw the one moment in Russian history where a lot of UFO data came out. So-called KGB files and much more in terms of Russian media. A tremendous amount of information came out in terms of UFOs that we now have in the public domain. So it's in the moments of major crisis, not minor, but really major crisis, that you get this type of opening that will occur. Now, in the case of the United States, the biggest and toughest of the nations, and with the most UFO information to spill, I could imagine that such a scenario could occur. That some insider sees a window of opportunity, so to speak, and starts leaking information, a la Edward Snowden type of a scenario, something along those lines. I could see that. I don't know that that will happen, but I could see that happening. And again, not simply the UFO phenomenon. There's obviously 9/11 that can come out. And there's a lot more that might come out in such a crisis scenario. And I think any number of these types of revelations could certainly be revolutionary. When I talk about is there a possibility of a diversion from disclosure, I say that just for us to keep in mind that the U.S. media complex is very, very powerful still, even though we have an alternative media. What we call mainstream media is still quite significant and works hand in glove with the political powers. So diversions from disclosure could be one or another types of false flags, or just different types of media spin to divert attention away. But I think a premature disclosure is a real possibility.